Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and in this video we're going to be looking at the Google Nexus 5X from LG. Now this is back when Google was still trying to find their way, and we're asking manufacturers such as LG, HTC, and Samsung on how to get a phone of their own, featuring a stock Android type of feel. Now I keep wanting to say Google, it's the LG Nexus 5X came out in October of 2015, which is around the same time as the iPhone 6s and the Samsung Galaxy S6. Now, for storage, this thing came in 16 and 32 gigs, with this one being 32 gig model being the highest up there. Now, this came with Android Marshmallow, which is 6.0, and was able to be upgraded to Android 8.0, but this one being on the Google Fi network, it is able to be upgraded to 8.0. Now, for cameras, the rear camera is a 12.3 megapixel rear-facing camera capable of, surprisingly, 4K at 30 frames per second, which here in the settings, it will clearly show you the different types of ratios you can record in and the different qualities. Now, this is still a feature that Android still takes advantage today with its multiple types of custom camera features versus an iPhone. Now, for the front camera, it's a little bit disappointing. It's a 5 megapixel front-facing camera capable of 1080p video recording at 30 frames per second. Now, this thing does have a weird glare on it, probably just because the brightness of the screen is all the ways up. So if you were to turn the brightness down a little bit, it would probably be a little bit better than that. Now, for the apps here, just a little bit of background. This phone has 2 gigs of RAM, which features the Qualcomm Snapdragon 808 chip, which is a hexa-core processor with an Adreno 418 GPU. Now, the two games we're going to be testing is the Snake vs. Block and the Paper.io 2. Now, both of these games aren't as graphical, such as Real Racing 3 or any other 3D game that's out there right now. But other than that, this thing runs pretty smooth for only having half the gigs of a normal phone in today's standard for being 5 years old. Now, just to talk about the Nexus series. Now, this is before the Pixel came out, before Google decided, hey, we need to make our own phone and have a stock Android use on it. Now, LG has pretty good screens, for example. Now, this is a 1080 by 1920p display, which is an LCD IPS panel. And this is before the time that LG started putting a lot of PLED or OLED displays on their own. Same thing with Samsung. Samsung was just around the time of experimenting with the OLED technology as well. Now, Apple didn't get into the game until 2017 with the iPhone X. So this phone, with its pretty good 1080p panel, was pretty good for the time up until the Pixel series came out in 2016. Making this phone literally the phone right before the 6 and 6P Nexus that came out after it, making these the last two phones that LG was partnered up with Google. Now, for example, any gameplay on here, this thing is able to store pretty much anything. The only downside about this phone is that it doesn't have any ability for a micro SD card. That's the only downside about getting a Google phone today too, the fact that you are not able to expand the storage up to anything past the 32 gigs that this phone came with. Now, as for the battery is a 2700 milliamp hour battery with no wireless charging, but it did come with the first generation 2.0 Type-C charging, and it has a headphone jack. And also, the cool part about this phone too is it introduced a rear-facing fingerprint scanner. So this thing was pretty good for the time. It's pretty fast as well. Now we're just going to simply take a look and see how the video playback is by looking at one of the previous videos on the channel, which is about the HTC Desire 626. Now this thing as before, it's 1080p, but it's able to play at 60 frames per second, surprisingly. Desire 626S from Virgin Mobile. Now this phone also came on T-Mobile as well, and this phone came out in July of 2015. And this phone has a 5-inch IPS LCD display capable of 720p. As you see here, the speakers on this phone are actually pretty decent. Now, unfortunately, unlike the HTC in the previous video, this phone only has an earpiece on the top and a speaker on the bottom, meaning that this phone looks like it has two speakers, but it actually doesn't. Now, as for RAM management, this thing is a little bit hiccupy, with the first Paper.io app being good, but the others, it seems to have to reload each one. But I give it props for it being 5 years old and only having 2 gigs of RAM. It's done pretty well, even though the HTC that I reviewed last week simply kept every single app in the background, and it had a processor that was about a year older and also half the RAM of this phone. But other than that, this is pretty much a good phone for a stock Android type of feel, and this thing is pretty premium and lightweight. This thing has the single camera on the back, a single flash LCD, a single flash, and also a laser focus as well, so it could autofocus. On the side is the power button on top, the volume rocker below that. There is no buttons on the left hand side except for the SIM card tray, and on the bottom is the headphone jack and the Type-C port. But other than that, this phone is pretty well built, and this was simply the last of LG before they went ahead on their own and no longer had Google as the type of sponsor for their phones. But other than that, if you like this tech review, feel free to hit that sub button down below, and I would greatly appreciate it. But other than that, we'll catch you all in the next video. See you in TL.